Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, Anita Finley.
Anyone who's not been to Hawaii, by the time we finish with this show, you'll know you've been to Hawaii. So Pamela Varma Brown is the author of this wonderful, well, there are two books. Kauai is the one, and there's a Kauai 2. And we already had a lovely conversation with her before, but we're bringing her back again. And her book is so filled with people and their stories. I thought that you all would enjoy this. So, Pamela, let's get started.
Hi there. Thank you.
Yes, and your cover, of course, I told you that before when we discussed this. I know you've been living there in Kauai since 1988, and exactly. Your best thing is bringing people into other people's worlds, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's some very interesting, fascinating people, and some are characters, some are just charming people in the state of Hawaii, and my specialty at this point in time is the island of Kauai, where I've lived for, now 28 years. And, what I like is when I get to meet people like this and I hear their stories, some are so fascinating and some are just so amazing, these so-called everyday people living on a tiny island, what they've accomplished and the kind of lives they live, that I am compelled to share those stories with people, in large part for entertainment, but also for inspiration. You know, when I am reminded what people have been able to accomplish from this very small island as their home base, it reminds me, and it helps me remind everyone I come in contact with, that all of us can achieve whatever we desire. There's no excuses for us. We don't have to say, well, I don't live in Chicago. Well, I don't live in New York. You know, we can do whatever we want from wherever we want, especially if we do it with joy and find something that's our passion. And that's been a real common theme with people that I have had the good fortune to interview.
And I was wondering, of all the people that you have interviewed, most of them seem like they've lived in Hawaii all their lives as compared to you, where you're kind of a transplant, even though you've lived there a long time. Is that true?
You know, I would say it's of the people that I talk to, and really looking around the island and all the other islands in the state, I would say it's more like 50-50 or 60-40. There are tons of transplants, but I also like to capture the stories of people who've been here for a long time because they have a totally different experience. Like, for example, I grew up in Los Angeles, so when I came to Hawaii, my perspective on it was totally different. And more than that, my childhood experience is dramatically different than people who grew up in the islands. People who grew up playing in the ocean, that was their playground. That was their experience that's so much different than ours. And I like to capture that because for one thing, most of us don't have that experience. And for another, as time progresses, and I'm certainly a proponent of progress, but progress necessarily changes things that were there before. So the idyllic childhoods that a lot of people in the islands recall, it just doesn't necessarily exist anymore. For example, one of the favorite places to play and surf of some of the people I've spoken with, right now there's a big hotel right there. And it's a beautiful hotel, but it's not the same experience those kids had growing up in the, 1900s, early 1900s.
True.
So
everything changes, but probably changes less on an island where you are. And the other thing I want to tell you is I had not heard, of course, of Kauai, but every time I told someone about the book, oh, yeah, I've been there. It's the most beautiful place. So, as you said, it's probably of all the islands, it is unique. And as I looked through your book, some of the scenes with the inaccessible mountain areas.
Yes.
Wow.
You're probably thinking primarily of, well, there are probably two, but one is called the Nepali Coast.
Yes.
Which is on the north shore of Kauai. For those who don't know, the island of Kauai is pretty much round. It's about 550 square miles, so pretty small compared to most areas on the mainland, which is what we call the continental United States. And Kauai, the terrain is, actually all our islands in Hawaii, the terrain is very mountainous. So sometimes people, when they haven't been to Kauai, they think of this tiny little dot on the ocean, And in some respects we are. However, we have mountains that go up to 4,500 feet elevation, which is pretty high for a mountain, and it gives us a lot of variety in the terrain. So when we look anywhere, we see these beautiful, majestic mountains with waterfalls coming down. And the other thing I was going to mention, so you can envision Kauai, is our primary, there are a lot of roads on the island, but our primary highway is kind of a horseshoe shape or omega shape in that it doesn't connect at the top of the island. At the top of the island is Nepali Coast, and there's no road that goes through there. You can only access the Nepali Coast by a hiking trail or by boat, or you can fly over it. So it's very rugged, which is a large reason why there are no roads. It's not inhabited, and it's one of the most stunningly beautiful areas I've ever seen in my life. We were actually watching last night Ken Burns' series on national parks on Netflix. Oh. And when I think of Nepali Coast, that should be a national park. It is that majestic and that unparalleled in its beauty and drama. There's huge cliffs towering over the ocean, and it's normally quite rough. The ocean's quite rough, that side of the island. So these huge waves are crashing against the cliffs. The cliffs are both green and red. Our dirt on Kauai is a very deep red rust color, and that's because of all the iron, because the islands were formed from volcanoes, so there's so much iron in the soil, it's red. So the red and the green against each other is very dramatic, and because the island of Kauai is about 5 million years old, we've had a tremendous amount of erosion over the years. I say we, but obviously I wasn't here 5 million years ago. But the mountains, because we have these high mountains, the peaks capture the rain clouds because there's no other land mass very close to us. And so we get a lot of rain on the island. That's one thing that keeps the island so green. Our nickname is the Garden Island. But it also, the rain carves very deep ridges and valleys. Actually, you can't carve a ridge, but it carves very deep valleys in the mountains, and you see that dramatically along the Nepali coast. There's really nothing like it that I've seen anywhere I've traveled. And there's a hiking trail that goes 11 miles along that coast. It doesn't cover the entire coast, but it's 11 miles. The first 2 miles are fairly heavily traversed. A lot of people do that. Beyond that, it's very narrow, and if you slip, you're going over the cliffs.
Wow.
Yet still, people travel from around the world to hike it.
Mm. So
that's kind of a little overview of what the island is like. And then everywhere you look when it rains, there's waterfalls. You know, if we're driving to the grocery store, we see waterfalls. It's very, very cool.
It is, but I guess my big question is, are you worried about volcanoes?
No, on Kauai there are no active volcanoes. Actually, I live pretty close to one of the last active volcanoes, but it's been dormant for, I think over 1 million years. But the active volcano is on the big island of Hawaii Island, and that's, I forget how many 100 miles away. But occasionally, they will have an earthquake on the big island that we will feel over here. And that's a little trippy. I grew up in California where there's earthquakes, but there normally are not in Hawaii unless the volcano is doing something. And that's kind of wild to know that a few islands over, the volcano did some kind of eruption and our windows are shaking.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, that was a good answer because I was curious about that. Well, let's go and follow through with the people who wind up there. If someone were to come there as a visitor and they decided to stay, is there a way for them to earn or make money?
There is, but on the smaller islands in Hawaii, and Kauai is the 4th largest, which means we're still pretty small, you have to be a little bit more creative unless you're going to be comfortable with a job in the hospitality industry. And some jobs there are very good managing hotels. And then there are a lot of housekeeping jobs, which serve some people fine, but that's not always somebody's dream job if they're going to relocate from the mainland. So what we find in the islands are, especially on Kauai, are a lot of entrepreneurs, and they find ways of doing something that interests them that serves others. It's pretty interesting what people come up with.
Well, I'm sure that's true. And, of course, you have been very fortunate to figure out some things. And I know you've been there a long time and you love this. But what I really want to do is talk about some of these people who you have featured in your books. They are just lovely, and you just know how to get things from out of people. So who would your favorite person in the second book that you did be? We won't tell anybody that you said that.
I actually can't pick one because every time I think there's one, then I look at another story and go, oh, yeah, that guy. My boyfriend and I will start recounting our conversations with them. Although I will tell you one. You might recall when we talked about Kauai Stories 1, the first book, we talked about the couple. The wife just turned 80 and the husband's in his late 70s. They deliver our daily newspaper.
Oh, yeah, I can't forget that, the banana story. I've told that to lots of people.
Well, I have to tell you, not only did they just drive by and wave at my window as they were, literally just now, as they were delivering the paper, they delivered us another batch of banana bread this morning.
Little do they know that we talked about them, right?
Exactly. Well, they reappear in Kauai Stories 2, the second volume, in the Romance on the Garden Island segment of the book. And there are several romance stories, and theirs is amazing. They met probably when they were about in their 60s, I would guess. I mean, they weren't spring chickens. And both of them, especially the husband, had really dramatic paths to go through before they were ready to meet each other. And it's funny, this is such a small island. We've got about 65,000 population, not counting the visitors who are here every day. And sometimes people will say, oh, I'll never be able to fall in love on this island. It's just too small. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have a romance section of the book, of one of the books, is because some of the romance stories here are amazing, which is a reminder to all of us that no matter where you are, you can have whatever you want. If you want to find your true love, you can do that wherever you are, in a big city or on a small island. I've seen a lot of really amazing couplings that are lasting for the duration take place here. And that the newspaper delivering couple is one of those. But as far as other favorite people, one of mine is a man that you mentioned before we came on the air, Mr. Robert Hamada.
Yes.
And Bob, when we interviewed him, he was, I think, I should tell you how we met. By the time my first book came out in 2012, we no longer had a Borders bookstore on Kauai, and that had been our go-to place for new books. When Borders closed, we had one bookstore remaining, and at the time they were primarily used books, quite successful, but they were just starting to stock new books. So as a indie author, indie publisher, I had to figure out, how am I going to market these books? How am I going to let people know these great stories are out there in my books? So one day, a manager of one of our local grocery stores said, hey, come do a book signing in the grocery store. And I thought, like I said, I grew up in L.A., and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. But then I thought, well, I've been here for 20-whatever years. Maybe that's normal for Kauai. So we set me up right in front of the frozen foods aisle. I had my little table. And I talked to, a number of different people. Oh, and the manager said, come on Thursday morning because it's senior discount day, and you have a lot of stories that seniors will like. This was in my first book. There were a lot of stories of older Kauai that seniors told and seniors really enjoy. So I said, okay. So towards the end of my several hours there in the store, it was a really fun event. It was actually a lot more fun than I anticipated. This one guy comes up to me, and he's pushing his cart, and I could tell he was older, but he looked pretty healthy, and he starts chatting with me. As here we call it talking story. So he starts talking story with me about, shooting the breeze about, I don't even remember what. And he was kind of a gruff guy. And after we chatted for a little bit, he goes, you know how old I am? And I said, no. He goes, yes. So I'm looking at him, and I thought, well, I don't know, maybe he's, 71, 72. So I said, yeah, maybe 71. And he goes, no, 92. And here's this guy. A lot of people think of their 90s as a time where you're either not here anymore or you're decrepit or falling apart. And here's this guy trucking through the grocery store, pushing his cart, having a very lively conversation with me. So eventually I ask him his name, and he tells me Bob Hamada. And I realized that 20 years before, I had seen in our local museum, which is quite a fine museum, especially for a very small community, some of his wood-turned bowls. He takes wood and he turns them into bowls, which is, I wouldn't say it's a common art, but most people have seen wood-turned bowls. But even 20, 25 years ago, his work was extraordinary. And what I came to find out is that his work had been acquired by heads of state of other countries, museums around the world. His bowls are held in collections of some very highfalutin art collectors. Really quite a talent. So we went to talk to him. He lived, actually, he just passed recently. He lived at the end of a long road along which there are no other homes. It's a road I didn't even know existed. You follow it all the way to the end, and there was his house. And in the back of his house was a workshop where he would turn bowls. Oh, in his front yard, there were tree stumps of all shapes and sizes that he was just waiting to get on his woodworking machines. And in his workshop were bowls in all varying stages of development. Now, in Hawaii, just like Florida, it's very humid. So when you do things like lay down hardwood floors or turn wood bowls, you have to let the wood acclimate for a while because the wood is going to change shape based on our humidity.
I see.
And as you know, humidity changes everything else too. And so he will work on a bowl for maybe a few weeks, and then he'll put it on the shelf for about 6 months and let it sit as it changes shape. Then he'll put it back on his machine, work on it for a couple of weeks, put it back on the shelf, and so forth. Some of his bowls are in development for 2 or 3 years before they are done. And one of his trademarks is to spin the bowl. I forget the name of the machine he puts it on. I don't think it's a lathe. I actually don't remember what it's called. He just called it the machine. He would spin his bowls until the wood was so thin, but his art was knowing exactly when to stop spinning it right before the bowl would explode. Sometimes it would just crack, and he has some bowls that he would have to repair using other pieces of wood. It almost looked like surgery, like he stitched them. And he has a couple stories of bowls exploding and shattering all throughout his workshop. But when you see his bowls, like there's a photo of one of them, the edge of one of them in Kauai Stories 2, that bowl is 1/16 of an inch thick. It's insane. And when you pick them up, they definitely feel sturdy. They don't feel flimsy at all, but it's such an art to spin it to that thin. And then you can see the wood grain so beautifully. And he said ever since he was a kid, he saw the beauty in wood. He said, people travel the world always looking for so much beauty. They look. And he said, for me, I find it in wood. And you could walk around with him, and he would all of a sudden stop walking and stop talking and look at a tree, and he would be focused on I guess you would call it the cradle of the tree, where it comes up from the trunk where the branches start branching out, and he could envision that part turned into a bowl.
So here he is in this little island making these very valuable pieces, and so he lived a very wonderful life. That's why he lived to be 92.
Exactly. Yeah, I think when he passed, he was probably about 94 by then.
That's
and he
beautiful.
He was a combination of a craftsman, an amazing craftsman, and also a curmudgeon. And
so he didn't have a wife?
I think they had been divorced, or
right.
I think they might have been divorced. He'd lived alone for a long time.
Okay.
So
he lived
a very interesting bachelor life.
Yeah, sounds like it. There was something else that I was very touched by, and that was Kauai needs all of its parts to be whole. And I see the rocks in that nice little Thank you. That's quite a story. Why don't you tell us about that?
That story was came to us from a woman named Sue Kanoho, who's the long time executive director of the Kauai Visitors Bureau. And she also is a transplant like I am. She came, I think, long before I did. She married a local man, and she's very much part of the community. And she feels like most of us who for whom the island is in our blood, that we want the island to remain whole. And as much as people come to visit and want to take part of it home with them, the more you do that, the more you basically desecrate what this island is. And that's the same for any place you visit, whether it's a national park or a Hawaiian island. So she has had the experience of visitors taking home sand or rocks or other treasures from the island. And the legend is that the volcano goddess, Pele, P-E-L-E, spelled Pele, the legends describe Pele as being very possessive of her islands and a very fiery personality, which is one of the reasons she's the volcano goddess. They say she lives in the volcano on the Big Island. The stories go that if you remove rocks from any of the Hawaiian islands and take them anywhere outside of the state, you will bring some bad luck upon you. Some people say it's a curse. Some traditional Hawaiian practitioners won't go so far as to say it's a curse, but they do say that it's a blessing when people allow our islands to remain as they are.
Yeah, so it says, just take a picture. Take your picture, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what Sue says. You know, pictures last a long time, and, you know, they can bring back beautiful memories. There are some amazing artists in Hawaii. You can bring back some beautiful pieces of art or go home and order them and have them delivered. So what happens is visitors oftentimes will take home rocks or sand. There's even been some cases where they've taken home quite large rocks. I can't imagine carrying something that heavy through your luggage, but through the airport. Right. But when they get home, a lot of them have experienced a lot of bad luck.
Really?
Some of them than others, yes. And when they finally are able to take a step back and take a breath and look at, wow, when did all this bad luck start? Sometimes they'll mention it to someone and they'll say, hey, did you bring home any rocks from Hawaii? And more often than not, the visitor will say, yeah, I did. I never even thought of that. And then they'll be educated about what these stories tell. And then they will lickety-split, get these rocks or sand or whatever it is they've taken back to Hawaii and Kauai as quickly as possible.
That's where we got this from. Thank you for opening your view.
Sue has a collection of letters and rocks, and some of the letters are really heartwarming in that people had such a great memory of Kauai and they didn't know that taking rocks was going to be a problem. And some of them, the letters are truly heartbreaking, all the health problems and all the awful things that have befallen them. And, you know, Sue and I have talked about this, and we really couldn't say if taking rocks from Hawaii has truly caused those people's problems. You know, we hope not. But the moral of the story is, you know, don't take what doesn't belong to you. And when you come to a place as beautiful as Kauai or as special as any other place you may travel, leave it intact when you leave. There are other ways to take memories. So,
well, you'll appreciate coming from California. When I first traveled there with my new husband, I was fascinated by the black rocks on some of the shorelines. And there would be nothing to do but that I'd have to go down and collect 10, 20, 30 of them. And we had to put them in a box and ship them because I used to do gardening and I wanted to put them in my garden because they were very special, which I did. I don't think we have them anymore, but when you were talking, I thought, oh, my goodness. But there were so many of them there, and I don't even know how they get there on the seashore in California. You probably do.
Yeah, I don't exactly know. It's probably from when the continent was originally formed. You know, came up from the ocean bottom, or it came down from the.
You see those
mountain.
little black shiny rocks that when I get a massage, they use those on me.
Yeah, exactly. and some of those are, they're river polished.
Right. Maybe so. Okay, so let's keep going. These are great, great stories. And So if someone, are you finding that there's a lot of intermarriage? It sounds to me like someone came from there and then they married a islander.
You know, that happens a lot, and it actually started quite a long time ago. The history, one part of the history of the Hawaiian Islands, especially Kauai, is that in the 1800s, the sugar industry came to the forefront. As a matter of fact, Kauai, the south shore of Kauai, is where the first commercially successful sugar plantation in Hawaii was formed. As the sugar plantations grew, you know, it was acres and acres and acres of sugar. As those plantations grew, the plantation owners and managers, who, for whatever reason, were mostly Caucasian people who had come over from the mainland or other places, they realized they needed a lot more labor than they could find in the islands. Hawaiians in those years, in general, did not enjoy working for the plantation, and they also didn't have to because the kings had given them, and the queens, the monarchy and the royalty had given them land, and they would work the land, give some of the things they grew to the royalty, and then go back to working their land. So they were living a subsistence lifestyle and were very comfortable. You know, there weren't high rises. They didn't have rent to pay. They didn't have car payments to make. It was a totally different lifestyle than most of us have ever been exposed to. So when the Hawaiians were asked to work in the sugar plantations, some did for a while, but most of them had really no desire to work from before dawn to after dusk, very physically hard labor. So most of them quit and went back to their old lifestyle. It was far more enjoyable way to pass their time. So the sugar plantation owners realized, gosh, we've got to import some labor. They imported people from all kinds of different countries, which is what gave Hawaii the ethnic diversity that we have now. So people came from Japan, China, Portugal, a little bit from Spain, a lot from the Philippines, and some other places, a little bit from Germany. Typically, the Germans came in and they were engineers, so they were plantation managers or engineers. But the other groups, like the Japanese, the Chinese, the Filipinos, Puerto Ricans, and one is slipping my mind, but they were imported to be the laborers. So they would work out in the hot sun for 12, 14-hour days, cutting cane and doing all kinds of things in the fields. There were not unions for a long time, but working conditions were very difficult. And those immigrants, their initial plan was work out their contract, which was typically a 2-year span of time, save a bunch of money, and go home with a bunch of money. So they'd basically be able to change their status in life when they went back to their home country. It would sort of be like if somebody gave you $1 million today in the United States. Well, it would change your life. So that's what they were hoping to do. Even though their housing was provided and their medical care was provided, the reality was a lot different than what they had envisioned. They worked really hard, and most of them were not able to save much money at all. So about half, maybe more than half of the immigrants went back to their home countries, but the other half stayed here. So that left quite a foundation of a variety of of various cultures within the islands, and intermarriage. Some cultures intermarried more than others, and over time there's been quite a blending. So typically you'll see somebody, maybe like a really beautiful woman, and when you ask her background, you'll find out there's Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian, and maybe Portuguese in her background. So we call the sort of, it's not really slang, but there's a language called Pidgin English that is spoken here.
Yes, I know Pidgin English. I mean, I don't know it, but I've heard of that, and I was wondering what that is.
It actually was spawned from the time when all these different ethnic groups came to the islands to work in sugar. So you've got all these Japanese who have to work with Filipinos, for example, but they didn't know English. But they had to understand some English so that the plantation supervisors could get their orders across. And, of course, all the workers needed to and wanted to communicate with each other. So they created something called Pidgin English, which I love it, actually. I can't speak it, but I use a couple phrases here and there, but I like to listen to it because it's getting a point across in the fewest possible words. So, for example, instead of saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you today, a person might just say, no can.
Right.
Which I think is beautiful.
It's a little bit like our texts, right? We do that when we text
exactly.
people.
And it's said with a certain accent and a certain lilt that I can't imitate well, but it's to me it's musical. And as a matter of fact, I believe that Pidgin English, the Hawaiian version of Pidgin English, has officially been made a language. So I forgot why I started telling you about Pidgin, but just to finish the thought on Pidgin, one of my favorite phrases to take no can a step further is sometimes if you're asking somebody to do something, you'll say, if can, if no can, no can.
I like that. That's
Is that
good.
Beautiful?
Sure. That's great. Well, this is always wonderful talking to you. We still have more time, but I want to tell everybody again, I'm talking to this delightful author, Pamela Varma Brown. She wrote 2 books. We featured in our April issue. We featured her on the cover with her book called Kauai Stories. And actually, there's a book 1 and book 2, and they're all about the most interesting people, about actually hula, about so many things. In fact, you have really piqued my interest. In fact, my husband said, is there a place that you really would like to go? And I said, yes, Hawaii. And because I told you I haven't, it definitely would come where you are. And I was thinking, my goodness, I know it's probably expensive to retire there, but sounds wonderful.
You know, it's interesting. It is Hawaii is pretty costly because we are each of the islands are dots out in the middle of the ocean. When you look at a map, we are pretty darn far from the continental U.S. And so things are costly here. It takes just about everything that can't be grown or raised here has to be flown in or comes in on a ship. So there's quite a cost associated with that. But we do see a lot of people retiring here, and we do see a lot of people who grew up in the islands and then who worked on the mainland for maybe 40 years, come back here to retire, and you have never seen such happy people to be back in the islands. It's a simpler lifestyle here, but like our recreation, we have plays. You know, we'll go to the theater and we have movies and stuff like that. But some of our favorite recreation is to go down to the ocean. Every beach looks different from one another. Each one has its own personality, the type of waves, how much privacy you have there, if you have to climb over rocks or if you can just drive right up, if you can be there and see maybe only one other person or no other people, or if you're going to see all your friends there. Every beach is different. And for me, one of my personal favorites is to be at the ocean in the morning. I live on the east side of the island, so I get to see the sun rising over the ocean. Oh, my gosh, there's nothing like it. And the colors are different every morning. And the sun's shining on the ocean, just glistening. Some days it's pink, some days it's red, sometimes it's yellow or orange. And as the sun gets higher, the light becomes so bright, it no longer has a color, but it shines on the ocean like a shimmering silver. I never get tired of it. And no matter what mood you start out in the morning, when you see that, you can't help but feel happy and overjoyed to be alive on this planet and to be fortunate to see something like that.
Yeah, right. You're right. Now, for 28 years, we recently sold our house. We had built it and lived in it. It was on the ocean here in Palm Beach County. It was very special. And we did sell it, and we moved over to the Intracoastal. But the one thing that people don't realize, they always say, well, but you can see it during the day, but at night it's always black. No. At night, there's always enough light, and the moon shines on it. And living on the ocean was something that I, of course, will never forget. And it was absolutely, just as you were describing, the colors with the clouds. It's really gorgeous. So I appreciate what you just said. I love living here in Florida, but you have made Hawaii sound, it's not just Hawaii. It's not just, it's the people. I get the feeling, and maybe I'm wrong, people are people, but they seem to be kinder there on your island. They seem to care more about nature, about people. Is that true, or is it just the way you wrote everything?
No, that has absolutely been my experience. And that's why I wanted to share these stories. And I think it's a combination of several things. One is the Hawaiian host culture. We call it the host culture because those of us who are transplants, we've come to Hawaii. A culture already existed here, and we love it, and we want to respect it and make as much of it a part of our lives as possible. And the Hawaiian culture in general is very gentle, very kind, and extraordinarily respectful of one another. Even when you see Hawaiians disagreeing with each other, it is far more gentle than I ever grew up with in Los Angeles. It's so much more respectful. So there's that is an underlying current to everything we do and everything we are here. Then there is the connection with nature. Like I said, I grew up in LA, so that wasn't something that I was particularly connected with. I didn't dislike nature. It just wasn't part of my existence. Everything was very concrete and freeways and, go to work, get a job, blah, blah, blah. In Hawaii, everything you do, especially on a small island like Kauai, everything you do involves nature in one way or another. So even if you are driving to an office and you're working in a traditional cubicle setting, you are probably driving past the ocean. If you're not driving past the ocean, you are driving past or through mountains. On Kauai, everything is green. Even on the west side where it's drier, we have a very different climate on the west side from the east side. Even then, though, everything grows year-round. We don't, just like probably most parts of Florida, we don't have a winter frost. Trees don't die. Everything's always growing, always green. When you see that and when you're surrounded by that and when you can walk out your front door, whether you're walking out of a house or an apartment, and you can touch that and breathe that fresh air. We don't have smog here. When you are able to experience that, that's what the earth originally was. That's what the earth was like when humans first, became humans on this planet. So it brings us back to our natural essence of who we are as human beings on this planet. And it does that whether you're consciously aware of it or not. And it's interesting on Kauai, there's a saying on Kauai that if you are meant to be on Kauai, the island will embrace you. If you're not meant to be here, it will spit you out. And we have watched some people who cannot get into the feeling of kindness and respect for one another get spit off the island pretty fast. And we don't really take joy in seeing somebody get spit out, but if they can't be nice to other people, they don't really belong on this small island. And we will watch how they basically create a scenario in which they feel they have to go and they leave.
Isn't
we always
that
say, the planes go both ways.
Isn't that interesting?
It's so true. We have friends who just moved here from the mainland about 8 months ago, and they are the kind of people who are naturally kind and were that way where they lived before. And we have watched them be embraced by the island, by people, by places, by the housing situation they wanted to find, by the work they wanted to create for themselves. Which goes back to what you were saying, what do people do for a living? There are definitely fewer opportunities in a small geographical location. We don't have factories, and there's just a lot less opportunity. But this couple that moved here, the girlfriend wanted to start a bookkeeping business. Within no time, she was connected with people who needed a bookkeeper. And she now has a full slate of bookkeeping clients.
Isn't that great? Well, if I came, I'd want to do radio. I don't even know the opportunities, but if it's right, it would be right, right?
Yeah. There are great radio stations here. As a matter of fact, I might know of one that could be sold, so we will talk about that later.
It's funny how things happen.
Owner. Yeah,
isn't it funny how things happen because we reviewed your book and now we've become friends, and I am going to get to Hawaii, and my husband he's been there once, but not with me, but we'll work that out. And this has just been this is so wonderful. We said that we had to do all this time, and our operations manager said, are you going to really be all that? I said, absolutely. She is so delightful. I know we'll be able to get all this time in, and so I don't even know if we still have time. We still do. He says we're doing fine. So anyway,
one thing I wanted to mention is, you live in Florida where everything's sunny and green.
Yes.
And I grew up in Southern California where everything was sunny and green.
Right.
And there's ocean by Florida and Southern California. So all my years growing up in Southern California, I was never fascinated by Hawaii. I had no idea what the allure of Hawaii was. And people would say, well, there's palm trees. And I was in L.A. going, well, we got palm trees. Right. Oh, there's the ocean. Well, I went to the ocean since I was in junior high school. I wasn't near it. Before I had a driver's license, it was 2 hours and 4 buses to get to the ocean from where I grew up.
Right.
So I never understood what is so special about Hawaii until 1988, through a funny set of circumstances. My then husband and I came here on vacation, and when I started looking around Hawaii, I was absolutely blown away. It is so different. I'm trying to think if I can really describe why. I think the biggest thing for me is a couple things. One is it's tropical, where Florida and Southern California kind of feel tropical, but Hawaii is really the tropics. It feels almost like you're in another country, but you are in the United States, and you get to use the same currency, and we have all the protections of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all the things that we hold valuable in the United States. Yet, on the islands, because all the islands are pretty small and so different from anything in mainland U.S., you feel far removed from all the, a Hawaiian word is coming to mind, pilikia, which means kind of like rubbish, garbage, arguments, nonsense. You feel kind of removed from that. And then, like I was saying, when you can just walk out of your home or your office and be enveloped by nature, just immersed in nature, and you don't have to go away for a weekend to do that. You can just, walk outside, and there you are. Like, I don't live near the ocean. I'm 4 miles away, which on Kauai is kind of far, but compared to anywhere else in the country, 4 miles away is no big deal. 10 minutes, I'm at the ocean. That kind of lifestyle is very challenging to find anywhere else. I think even of beach communities in Southern California, they're very congested. Mm-hmm. They're, the only thing that's similar is they're very high priced. Oceanfront in Hawaii is extremely expensive, just like anywhere else. But it's so much more accessible in Hawaii. You don't have to be rich to be able to access the beauty of nature in Hawaii. You can go up a hiking trail. You can walk to or drive to a waterfall and feel like you are more connected with the earth, with this planet, than really most other places. I mean, it's why people like to go away to a place like Yosemite or Yellowstone for a weekend or a week or a month. But here you can do that on an everyday basis. And you can still do your work and, have whatever career you want to have.
Yeah, it's great. Well, let's go back to while we still have some time, some of the other people. Now, the women, is there a woman, other than that great artist who we just both love, woman that particularly runs in your mind? I see they...
Yes. We have, living on a small island like this, you have to be somewhat independent. We do have a government, but it's small, just like everything else here. So you need to learn to depend on yourself. So we get people here. It's somewhat like Alaska in that respect, although there are definitely more frontiers people up in Alaska than we need to be because our climate's so mellow here. Kauai attracts some very unique people, and one of my favorites is a woman who goes by the name Bobo. Her real name's Suzanne, but she's been going by Bobo for many years. And Bobo, I would say, is probably in her 60s now. She first came to Kauai. She's a transplant. She first came to Kauai and was living in a place called Taylor Camp. And I haven't written about Taylor Camp. It's been very well documented both in book and on film by another author and a film producer here. Taylor Camp was started by a brother of the movie actress Elizabeth Taylor. He bought some land towards the just beyond the end of the road on the north shore of Kauai. Remember, I said the road doesn't go all the way around. So when we talk about the north shore, we talk about the end of the road. Mm-hmm. So he bought some land out there, and back then this would have been, I think, late 60s, early 70s. It was super remote, and the road itself was pretty horrible getting up there. So there wasn't a lot of traffic up there, both not too much by foot, not too much by car. And he started what was kind of, I guess you would call it like a hippie village, where people built extraordinarily elaborate tree houses on his property, and they would live there. There was no electricity, and they lived kind of a communal lifestyle. A lot of people running around naked. There was some degree of drugs, although not everybody up there was into the drugs. A lot of people just liked living free of boundaries and just being able to live in nature and raise their kids how they wanted in a natural environment. And it was definitely in the hippie era, so there was, all the stuff that came with the hippie era going on there. It was very, very interesting location and time period. Well, Bobo lived there with her husband and their 2 daughters. One of the things she began to do was swim in the ocean from right about where Taylor Camp was along Nepali coast. So remember how I was talking earlier how rugged the Nepali coast is? She would actually swim in the ocean up Nepali coast. And that she'd go maybe, at like 10, 11 miles, maybe longer. I'm a swimmer, and that's an area I have never swum. It can be really treacherous. You're in the open ocean. There is nobody going to rescue you if something goes wrong. You have to be not only a very strong swimmer, but you have to be bold. You just have to have a degree of self-confidence that most of us don't have to be in an environment like that. And if the waves get rough, if you see jellyfish, if a shark comes, if you're tired, if you're hungry, you cannot just swim over from the ocean over to the shore because it's all cliff. There's no place to land. There are a couple beaches. They're very narrow. They're hard to find from the ocean, and they are miles apart. So if you start cramping up, if you decide, wow, I just don't have enough energy to keep going, I'm too tired, if a shark is swimming around you,
oh my,
you're stuck.
Oh my!
It is a commitment to make this swim. Nowadays, now Bobo was doing this in I guess it was late 60s, early 70s. Nowadays, it's fitness craze and triathletes and things like that. Quite a number of people will make that swim. There are only certain times of year you should do it, when the ocean is very calm, much calmer than normal up there. Otherwise, you will die very quickly, and nobody's going to be able to see you. You can't call a lifeguard because no one will even know you're there. But now some people do it certain times of year, and it's very well thought out, and they have safety gear and stuff. But back then, Bobo swam naked. She might have used fins. Actually, I don't even know if she swam with fins. But she did this swim so often, it became like a meditation for her. And in those years, Bobo did some drugs, and I think she was also an alcoholic in those years. She's now 100% clean. Her mind is clear. She's super sharp. She's really a fascinating, amazing woman, and a reminder how resilient the human spirit can become.
Oh, absolutely. But you really do find them, don't you? And
I had heard of Bobo for years, and it wasn't until somebody suggested, gosh, you ought to write about Bobo. I thought, you know what, you're right. And I didn't know what to expect because I'd heard these stories about her, and I knew she'd been in the drug era, and I don't have any experience with that whatsoever. So I was a little intimidated when I called her, but she could not have been nicer, and she is very, very bright. And when she finally quit drugs and quit drinking, which she did on her own, she quit all of it cold turkey on her own. She had a woman tell her, "Oh, now that you don't do drugs and you don't drink, you don't have to do those crazy things anymore, like swim the Nepali coast." And she said, and what she told me is, swimming the Nepali coast was what kept me sane. I didn't do that because I was nuts. That kept me from going nuts, whether I was on drugs or whether I was straight. And she said, after that woman said that to me, I went out the next morning and I swam the poly again.
That's absolutely
Isn't
spectacular. Yes. And so, if you might have, when your book came out, or I know you're doing a third one now, you almost have to have a huge party with all those people in there.
We did. We had, in Hawaiian, mahalo means thank you. So after the first book came out, we had a mahalo party for everybody in book 1. And then when book 2 came out, which was last June, by last August last year, we had a mahalo party for everybody in both books. And it was so fascinating to see people who had only read about each other on this island. They might have heard about each other or read about each other, to see them connecting with each other. That was really fun, because now they knew more about each other, and they could finally meet face to face. Because just like in any place, even though Kauai is small, we all run in our own circles, and we have our own work, and we have our favorite recreation. So each of us are not all out talking to all 65,000 of the other people on the island every day. We just don't. You go have dinner with your same friends. You go to your same favorite restaurant. That's just human nature. So when we had this mahalo party, all these people from book 1 and book 2 were able to get together and meet each other. And it was fun just to sit back and watch them all.
Yeah,
see them all, acquainting with each other.
Well, and the banana bread, that makes me salivate. That I have repeated that story because we love bananas, and they're always going bad. And I say, I'm going to get a great recipe for banana bread. Maybe, I have an idea. Why don't you get the recipe for their banana bread? I'll put it in magazine next month, and we'll attribute it to them and to your book.
That's perfect. We're actually, as I told you last time we chatted, we hadn't known our newspaper carriers before we left bananas out one night, and then they took the bananas and brought us back banana bread, which was absolutely not. Hey, that doesn't happen in Los Angeles, at least not where I grew up. And actually, I'd never seen that before on Kauai. Well, we became friends with them, and as a matter of fact, are having dinner with them tomorrow night. So I will ask the wife for her recipe, because it is really, really good. And it's so funny that they didn't know that you and I were going to be speaking today, or that that's one of your favorite stories. And right when you and I started our chat today, my boyfriend walked in my office and showed me the bag of banana bread that came today.
Too much. That is so beautiful.
But that's how Kauai is.
Yeah.
The connections on this small island are like that.
I'd have to tell people now, I want them to get your book. I've been telling people if I want to do it again, so let me just give them some information. Okay, I have been talking to Pamela Varma Brown. She's the author of this great book I have in my hand here. There are two books, but we featured Kauai stories, and there's one, and then there's two. You should get both of them. But the way you're going to get that is by going to KAUAI stories.net, or if you can't remember that, you can go to writepath.net, which is WRITEPATH.net. You're better off going to Kauai Stories.
Well, actually, they're the same right now.
Oh, they
Both
are? Okay.
websites are the same, yeah.
Okay, great. And you're going to want to order this book. If you go to your last month's issue of Boomer Times, you'll see it on the cover, and then you'll see the review we made inside with a picture of both books. You will never forget these books. This is a perfect gift. As a matter of fact, we urged you to do this for Mother's Day because that's why we put it on the cover there. But now you have Father's Day, so if you didn't do it, buy it for Father. And
the books are in ebook too. So if you have someone in your family who loves Kindle, reading on Kindle, these are all in ebook as well.
Right. And can they order it on Amazon if they?
Yeah. When you go to my website, you click on the book cover, and it'll take you directly to that page on Amazon.
Okay. It's a great idea. Well, I'm not ready to let you go yet because this has been very inspiring. We still have a little time. I thought maybe what we could do is talk a little bit about. I think maybe he's still okay. Your next book, is it going to be just like this with just more stories?
I'm actually working on quite a handful of books right now. I'm in the middle of, I think, 4. One is called Hawaii Stories. So it's going to be let me back up. Kauai Stories 1 and Kauai Stories 2 each are a collection of 50 personal stories. So they're short enough you can go through them kind of fast and get a variety, but they're long enough you feel like you get to know each person.
Yep.
So that was really my goal. As a writer, I'm fortunate to get to meet these people. I feel so blessed. And they're so wonderful that I write the stories long enough so you feel like you know them as well. And there are photos of a number of them in the books as well. So the next book I'm working on is Hawaii Stories, which will be similar stories from throughout the whole state of Hawaii. And I'm going a little bit more slowly on that because, it takes a little time to travel to the other islands. And I want to find just the right stories that give, from each island, that give you the flavor of each island. Each island has its own distinct personality.
I know that it does, and I think we've just now run out of time, but we're going to get you. Listen, we're going to hopefully get that book to when you get that finished, but we'll be talking because I'm going to get that banana recipe from you, right?
Exactly.
It's been so joyful talking to you, Pamela.
Thank you
It's
so
as
much,
though
Anita.
I know you, and now I feel I have a friend there in
You
Hawaii,
absolutely do.
Kauai. Okay.
You absolutely do.
Thank you. It was just beautiful. Appreciate
Thank
it
you
so
so
much.
much.
All right. Bye.
Aloha.